This is Zach from Content Security Team. Today we'll be covering Cisco Identity Service Engine, also known as ISE, for authentication with a web security appliance. So starting with the version 8.8.033 build, this functionality being introduced. There is a user guide that will be reside permanently on the link here, and this is also what is the ISE-based authentication functionality if you want to know a little bit more in detail. So ISE is a leading security policy management platform. Basically, it automates the secure environment and control enforce essentially role-based authentication. So these two links, let's take a quick look. The first one, this user guide, will reside here once it's available for our customers for early deployment or as a general availability once 8.8 is available. So the user guide will reside here. The second link is the overview of Cisco ISE, and it goes in a great extent to describing the product detail. So what I have done here is essentially this topic is fairly large, so I have divided in 3 sections. Section 1 will talk about configuring web security appliance. Then section 2 we will talk about configuring ISE engine. Then section 3 will be verification. So let's get started. On section 1, on the web security appliance side of the config, these are the steps required. So you add an ISE engine from the GUI. These are the steps here. So as we go, and probably good idea to walk through it and take a look at it. So here's my ISE engine. We'll put them side by side so it'll be better. First we go to WSA. So steps requires to go to network, identity service engine, and this is the option was added in the 8.8 release. Network, service engine. We'll do edit setting, and that's where I'm using the IP address for my ISE machine, and that's where everything will be configured for these. So let's break it down. So the step 2, once you get to that page, after adding ISE engine IP or the host name, then it requires 2 certificates, the uploading the admin and PX grid certificate into WSA, and this is the certs it came from the ISE system certificate. So there's a lot of certs, so we gotta make sure we upload the right certificate. So this is the admin certificate tab, and this is the PX grid certificates. These 2 certs are coming from ISE system search engine. So we're basically just uploading it here just to show you. We'll go under, this is the ISE box, so administration, certificates, system certificate. So when you install an ISE engine or ISE appliance, what it does is there's a default self-signed server certificates that it installs. So all we gotta do is just export this cert out and import into. So system certificate, export out. So we'll cancel out of here. Okay. So once you install step 2, admin certificate and PX grid certificate, after getting it from ISE system cert, step 3, generating a WSA client certificate. This is on the same page under edit setting, and let's take a look at it. I think it will be side by side here. So here's the WSA. So we'll generate a certificate we're talking about is the WSA client certificate. So I have done so, basically. I have generated. You can also upload a cert. In my case, I have generated locally and gave him the credentials. This is the common name, just an IP address of the local WSA, Cisco, tag, and then expiration date. Basic certification generation. Once you generate this certificate here, then in step 4, we need to take that certificate and identity, create that identity on the WSA. Then you create an access policy. So step number 6 is percent aims to pull those Active Directory groups. So this is under custom. So these are the screenshots to create an identity. This is to create within the identity, you set up a profile, a privilege level, fallback authentication, and then user authentication method, identification method rather. Then you create an access policy. These access policy, then you can tie these SGT, which is security groups, and we'll talk about it once we do the once we start working on the ISE side of the config. And under access policy, we ISE. Then I have called employee AP, so just a policy name, and then we'll SGT. So before we move on to section 2, let's cover that. So identification. Web Security Manager, identification profile. So I have a couple of identity. The one that I've been testing with ISE, this is for the different net. So we'll use this, ISE employee. And these are the screenshots were in the notes section, just a name. We can, and this is what's added when you add an ISE engine. It will give you an option for transparently identify user with ISE. Second option is the fallback, support guest privilege that I have currently. But we can also do is we can use either the blocked transaction option, or we can do a required authentication. And if you have an AD realm, that will populate here as well. So ISE will be the primary method, and the fallback you can do. This part has not changed. This is the same. So we'll cancel out of here. And the second part, which is the most critical, access policy. So the access policy, I called it ISE employee AP. Similar fashion what we do today, you create a policy name, where you want to place it. In this case, the identity profile I'm matching with the ISE employee. This is the important part, where you select the group and the user. So the SGT that will create that will show up in here, once you sync up, of course. So you click employee SGT. So whatever the SGT that we are pulling from ISE, this WSA appliance will populate this table. So in my case, I have several SGT configured on ISE, and we'll talk about it. Those SGTs will populate here once we get in sync between WSA and ISE. Once these SGTs are pulled, then we can tie these with the access policy. So identity tie with the policy, and then policy ties with the SGT. Simple as that. In my case, I have several SGT configured that I see on a WSA coming from ISE appliance. The employee SGT I'm using, that's why it's already being tagged for this one. Okay, so let's make sure we follow over the notes here. I think I have it down here. One thing is the %m in the access log, just to give you the groups that are authentication method rather. So that has not changed either. That's a log subscription under access log. And that's what I have is the %m. So it will tell me how is it being authenticated in that case. Okay. So we looked at the identification profile. We looked at the employee ISE profile itself under identification. And as we said before, this is a primary authentication for ISE, for transparently identification user with ISE. And then fallback is a guest privilege. And as we said, and we looked at it, there's a couple of other methods we can do. We can block transactions as a fallback, or we can continue on using AD realm for that matter. Then we looked at the access policy with the ISE AP itself, SGTs. I can add user as well if I need be. Then I tie access policy to SGTs that I want to use for that given policy. In my case, I called it employee_SGT. Okay. So now we move on to section 2. That's all you needed on the web security appliance. On section 2, we'll cover the ISE engine part of the configuration. So very first step is to importing WSA client certificate into ISE under trusted certificate, then ISE system certificate into the trusted certificate, and then check the status for the grid. So let's take a look at it on the ISE side. So what we're talking about in the step 1 is importing the WSA client certificate. If you remember, the client certificate that we created under ISE engine, and this is the client certificate that I have created. And what we'll need to do is we download this WSA client certificate that we created on the box, download this cert here, and then uploading this to ISE. Where it's going to need to go, and the steps are here. It's need to go under certificate, trusted certificate. So we go under administration, certificates, trusted certificate, and that's where we will import. We'll call it import and give it a and browse to it. So in my case, this is the one that I have it. I called it WSA cert, and if you look at the IP address, that's the WSA IP that I've been using, 95, 172.18.249.95. And just to get a friendly name, WSA cert. And if you have a multiple WSA, that you may want to start naming their host name and etc. so you can identify. So just to keep it simple, I have an IP address for the box, the cert name. So that's what pops up here. In the step 2, the importing the ISE system certificate under trusted as well. So in the instant when you install the ISE, as we said before, what it does, it creates a certificate, a default certificate. It's a system certificate, which is right here. You can check that, export that out, and also import this cert into the trusted cert, which I have done here if you look at it. So this is a certificate that ISE created by default once upon installation. So once you did that, I bring this into the trusted certificate as well. Okay. Once step 1 and step 2 are completed, then check the status for the PX grid from the ISE GUI. And this is required. So before you move further to the next level, it's required that we must be connected to the PX grid. And this is the grid that communication can establish between web security appliance and then identity service engine. So in this case, if we look at it, and this is under administration and PX grid. Pretty busy GUI, so navigation can be tricky sometimes. So this is the screen we're talking about. So it's connected to PX grid right here. And it will show all the certs and the names that are registered. And if we take a look at it, back here, I show this PX grid. Okay. So next is create a test user on the ISE engine. And for my test, I've created, I called it ISE user 1. Okay, let's take a look at it. So this user resides under administration and then identity. Under user, and that's where my user reside. That's my first user. You can add that, and it's all it is. It's just the basic credentials. You need a name. There are some required field, some of the optional field. Here are the option for the SGTs coming up next. So once we create a user, then at that point we want to make sure our security groups being populated as well. So once you spin up an ISE engine, it will have a default security group, but we want to make sure what we want to use, just give them more friendly naming scheme. So when we these SGT group populate into our access policy, so we can recognize which one to use on what user base. So for the creating SGTs from the GUI, policy, results, TRSAC, which is for the non-AD users or any remote users. They also known as the BYOD users, bring their own devices. So it could be anybody that it's not an Active Directory user in the environment, security group, and add. So we'll do that. So again, it's the navigation through the GUI on the ISE is kind of tricky. It's pretty busy GUI. So we go under administration and policy. Actually, policy, that was a perfect example. Policy, then results under TRSAC, security groups. So these are the groups that I have created. So beta, security, employee, guest, and unknown was I believe it was a default. So this is the one that I'm creating. Here says you're going to add a group and another SGT group that we need to create in a given environment. And again, I would strongly recommend to give it more friendly names, so this way we do know when we recognize it, when we do see it. So once we create the SGTs, these are the screenshots from there. And this is the Radius server. So Radius servers is the one that will authenticate users on the ISE, and then ISE will communicate with the WSA to push those users out using SGTs. So creating a users, creating a VM, Radius servers as a NAT device will be, let's take a look at that. Administration, and we'll go under network devices. That's where I have added my Radius, and you can have a multiple Radius servers, required field, port number, whatnot. So pretty straightforward, nothing big there. Okay. Last but not least, so once we created an SGT, once we created our Radius server and ISE user on the ISE engine itself, at that point we need to create an authorization policy. Now we create an authentication and a user. Now we authorization who belong to what groups, and that's where the last step, the step number 6, it talks about creating an authorization policy from the GUI. So let's take a look. We'll go under policy, then authorization. So let's expand a little. In my example, I have this is a basic authentication access, permit access, and this is a drop down that you can do insert new rules, duplicates, or if you want to edit that can be added here. That's where everything happens. So you can do a permit. You can also tie with the any command, any drop down, or we can take the user identity groups, so far. So there's several options here. So just to, again, to keep it simple, what I've done here is I use the basic authentication access, and I try to allow any from that group, permit, and save out of it. Okay. So as we look at it here, I have a guest user and I have a basic authentication user. The guest user, I try to keep it policy or results name as same as the permission level, so we can recognize who belonged to what group. So guest user belonged to guest user. There was for another test, the basic authentication access. These are the employee. It ties with the employee. Okay. So now the config part is done on both end of it, on the web security appliance and the ISE. The third part, or section 3, is the verification. There were several commands were added. So let's take a look at some of the basic first. From the web security appliance, we'll go under network, identity service engine, and that's where we were. So the first thing we want to see apart from the PX grid, so if we have, go to PX grid again, administration, PX grids, administration, PX grid services. So initially you may not see this is it connected. So what we need to do, the very first step, is to go into web security appliance, as we said, network, identity service engine, edit setting. Make sure the certificate admin cert, PX grid certs are uploaded from ISE engine. Of course, IP connectivity, if you're using a DNS name, so it should be able to resolve it. If you're using an upload cert or generate cert, make sure that is uploaded to the trusted store on the ISE itself. Once all these verification done on the top page, then we can hit a start test. What this start test is going to do is going to check the connectivity between web security appliance and ISE engine. In addition, it's also going to look at the PX grid status. If that passes, then it's going to next is check the SGTs. So whatever the SGTs are configured on my ISE engine, it's going to pull those down, and it will tell you a number of SGTs are configured on this machine. So if you look at it here, it retrieved 5 security group from, this is the ISE engine, and okay, and this is the host name for beta box, just to keep things simple. So this validation is completed. We want to see this. If anything is in red here, we need to resolve that's either the DNS or the IP connectivity or security group mismatch. There are a couple of tools on the command line. The log will give you that as well for any communication errors, but this is the most critical part. I can't stress enough to make sure this is all green before we move forward. Okay. And that's what I mentioned here in the step 1, is to, under identity server, edit setting, start test. A couple of other more commands. Before we do that, let's take a look at and send some traffic to it. So what I will do is point my browser explicitly to the web security appliance, and we'll make sure so we're looking at the access log, and here it comes. Okay, so in the event if it works correctly, what needs to happen is, since we added, if you remember, we added %m sign, and the %m sign will give you how it's been authenticated. So as we see that some of those logs is coming up, when we access the cisco.com, and it says SSO underscore ISE. So this is the indication, this is the single sign-on coming from ISE. This is my user, that's the ISE user, so that's the authentication. Here, it shows my ISE employee AP, so this is my policy, and ISE employee, this is my identity. So this part has not changed. It's pretty much similar to what we see today. So that hasn't changed. So if we see a guest in here, then it means I am using the fallback. I am not using ISE. So we want to make sure we see an SSO ISE. And that's where you see in these logs for my ISE employee AP and ISE employee identity. And then SSO ISE, which is the authentication that is using currently from the ISE. And of course the username itself, that will be indication as well. ISE user 1, that's my test user. Everything else is pretty much standard what we see today. Client IP, HTTP, decision codes and whatnot. Okay, and then let's see. We'll uncheck that. So okay, let's go back to our window here. So the other thing we can check is, as we see on the screen, there's a command was added called ISE data, several parameters. Under stats, it will gives you the IDs downloaded, IDs requested, IDs found, and several other options that you can see. And then most importantly, the ISE server status. You want to see connected. So we can look at the cache itself. So the cache will give you the IP address of the client. This is the ISE user. If I have a multiple user going or are connected through ISE and coming, their traffic coming through WSA, you will see the list here, just like we see on the auth user today for Active Directory users. So this will be the users coming from ISE under ISE data command. Okay. So in a large database, we can also do a check IP. In my lab task, if you see, is only a couple of IPs, so it's not a big deal. But if you have thousands and thousands of entries, then I can go and look for a particular client IP that to make sure it is coming through ISE into the WSA. So that's what I see here. And we'll run next command. So these are the SGTs. So these are the SGTs that configure on the ISE engine, and Web Security Appliance sees those through that connectivity, through that PX grid. So if you look at it, those were a total of 5. Any and then nones. So that's what the screenshots it. So there are several commands in the ISE data could be extremely useful. So stats, cache, SGTs for the groups. So this is the one way it should match this list when we run a start test from the command, from the GUI and the WSA under Identity Service Engine. When we run this start test, this SGT list that it pulls down from ISE engine should match here. Okay. And we saw this connected. If we do ISE data and then stats, some of the more screenshots here. The show will give you the IP address, and that's what we saw here on the right hand side. Okay, so there is one more command, actually the log that has been added, and that is a log number 17, ISE service log. So if you look at the ISE service log, that will tell you the current status as well. So when it's not working, you will see a connectivity issues, some of the errors here. And this log can also be changed to level 5, which is the trace level. By default, ISE log, it's on info, just like any other log on level 3. In the event if you are troubleshooting the connectivity issue, change the ISE log. In my box is 17. You can change it to level 5 with the log config command, edit, log config command, edit, log name, and then just change it to 5 and commit. So this way you'll give more information to kind of isolate what exactly going on. Okay, looks like this. Connection timed out. Okay. So the step number 4 for verification, I have it is from the ISE command line. You can also SSH to it for the ISE engine itself. And show application. Oh, strike. Okay, status ISE. So from the SSH access on the ISE box, show application status ISE will give you a lot more detail as well. Database listener, database server, application server, so this should all be running. If my communication is working correctly, ISE engine is configured properly, I should see all these processes are running. And apart from restarting from the GUI, we can also restart this application ISE only. So this is a typo here. It should be ISE, ISE, not use. So application stop ISE and application start ISE. So you can start and stop from here. Okay. So a few more things to go over. So on step number 5 for verification, if your connectivity is working, your users are authenticating through ISE and everything is working properly the way it should be, you should be able to pull a report on a web security appliance. This will be under web tracking. So let's try that. We'll go under reporting, web tracking. Report for last 30 days. As you notice here, I put in ISE user. You can search it. You can narrow the search down to an hour, day, or a week as desired. And ISE user here, and that gives me a detail of the user, what this user is been going through it. And some of the URLs, more details. This is all ISE user one. So since I have only one user just for going through the test and make sure the connectivity and everything works, the functionality itself. But you can, in a production environment, I'm sure you're going to have a lot more, so you can narrow down the search with several means. So that's what this screen shows for the connectivity itself. A couple more screenshots for the web tracking. This ISE user IP, you can drill down to it and look at the bits and bytes. Okay. So there are some of the use cases, benefits. Actually, there's a lot more benefits for using ISE-based authentication. A lot more control from the admin perspective. Just to call out a couple of them is the support scalability, support numbers. You can deploy a number of different scenarios because each office can be a different requirements. It can be done. And you can have an advanced enforcement capability through the SGA, through the SGT capability. And you can provide comprehensive guest access without giving the full privilege. So there's a lot of things can be done here. Also, you can combine authentication, authorization, and accounting all under one roof and one box to manage. So some of the caveats with the ISE-based authentication, again, a couple of things to call out. It's to keep in mind, HTTPS, SOCKS, and FTP protocols are not supported through ISE. And currently 802.1x and Radius authentication is supported. Fallback and other authentication from the ISE was not supported. Multiple policy the same way currently is not. And a couple of other things that are critical to know with the ISE deployment and what other caveats could be. For troubleshooting, first thing first, you want to make sure when we hit the start button from the GUI on the ISE engine configuration page, make sure we test. If you have any errors, you can follow these. These are some of it. But there's an enable radio registration. It's turned on under administration, PX grid servers, and top right. Okay, this is the one he's talking about. You will see by default is disabled, so make sure to enable that, and this turns green. So this allows to proactively look for what are the communication channels they are trying to talk to on the same PX grid. Okay. So be sure the ISE servers administration PX grid says connected, as we saw. So sometimes the certificates can be tricky. If you are having a problem even with the right cert, I had this while I was creating this lab. I had to delete all my existing certificate and start from scratch, and that's the trick. So for whatever reason, sometimes certificate get in the state that it just stopped communicating. So configure SGT group on the ISE server from the policy. Do that. Policy associated with the SGT. This is very important as well. Make sure we are associating the correct SGT groups to the user policy sets. Otherwise, you may not get the desired results and mix and match. So this step number 6, so you added this step, so which is the ISE default cert also need to be added to the trusted store on the ISE itself. Some of the stuff we saw earlier, the access log. So all the stuff is basic all the way to the point. Just my ISE username. This is ISE employee access policy identity. This is the method that it was authenticated, SSO ISE, and essentially it's the same. If it fails to use the ISE for whatever reason, because of the connectivity issue or SGT mapping incorrect, or just not working correctly, and if I have a guest authentication allowed, then that's what you will see, and that's the %, and it comes really handy when you're troubleshooting. It'll be useful. So this is actually coming from so in my config, I have the fallback is a support guest privilege. So that's what it's coming from. Some of the tests that initially was not working, it was keep dropping as unauthenticated. It was hitting the identity, if you see that, but not the policy. So policy was going to the default. So that'd be one indication as well. So a couple of things to watch out. Make sure your intended identity and intended policy matches to match the correct SGT groups. And that's where my initial tests were failing with the guest. Some of the great references are here. I have added. These are all located on Cisco CCO, and these are great documentation. So for Cisco Identity Service Engine, how to install and upgrade guides configuration, Cisco Identity Service Engine for troubleshooting. These are the great links on the CCO. So these are all CCO references and resources can be used if you have a troubleshooting issue. And of course, opening attack case is always an option. So with that, we'll do a quick review since this is a pretty large topic. So once this functionality has been available for our larger customer base, it will be located in our Cisco portal. The ISE-based authentication functionality being added since version 8.8033 build. So 8.8033 build and above. Section 1, I will broke it down to how to configure the web security appliance. You add the engine, then you add admin and PX grid certificate coming from ISE. Then you generate a local WSA client certificate, or if you have one in your environment, use that. Create an identity, create a policy. The only thing new here to tie within SGT. Otherwise, it's pretty same what we do today. Adding a %m sign, it really helps to, as we saw on the access log, to how client is authenticating. So that was all part of section 1. Then in section 2, we imported the WSA client certificate into the ISE trusted store, and then ISE default cert into the trusted as well. Then we looked at the PX grid status, make sure it is connected on the main page. Creating a user, then we added SGT groups, and strongly recommend to give a name more logical so we can, when this list grows, we know which group should match to which identities. Then this is the authentication server on the radius in my case. Create authorization policy, tie these SGTs. And these are the third section where the verification comes in. So make sure the start test under identity service engine added setting should work. We can also use the ISE data command, and there are several variations within the ISE data options. You can run a stat, cache, SGTs listed. You can look at the IP, and the new log is added. It's called ISE_service log, and that can be used to check the connectivity. By default is informational level, which is 3, and that can be changed to 5. Some of the command to verify from the ISE itself, and we can do application start ISE or application stop ISE right from the command line on the ISE itself. And the reporting part of it, so this is still a part of verification. We can verify it if the user intended that we are testing with, it is coming through and reporting into the web tracking as well. This is under reporting, web tracking, user client IP, or the name. These are some of the caveats as we talked about it, use cases listed here. And again, these are not a comprehensive list. These are some of the functionality that I have added here on top of mind. Some of the caveats that I have seen during my test, I added there as well, and what is not supported is there as well. For troubleshooting, there are some of the tips are included here. There's a lot more in the ISE troubleshooting guide and will be available also for the WSA as well. These are the access log when things are working. You've got a username, you've got access policy, identity, and the method of what's authenticated. And if it's not, and you have a fallback method for guest, that's what it reflects. And some of the references on CCIO doc. These are very useful, and I found some of the resources extremely, when you're troubleshooting, they're pretty good resource. Great. Thank you so much. With that, this brings us to conclusion. And thank you so much for watching this video. And we'll see you in another knowledge base soon. Thank you. Have a good day, have a good afternoon, and have a good evening. Thanks again.